Hi everyone, hi students, Global Supply Chain Management. I know you asked some questions last week and I want to go through them now, and we make this quick video recording and we go through your questions, we list them out. The first question was, the biggest question I have in my mind, it's an obvious shift in production from Europe or America to Asia. However, we do notice Westerners like to do business in a legal, straightforward manner, while in Asia there's bribery, bureaucracy, commissions. Will we ever see the Western business personnel having a positive impact to eliminate under the table business practice occurring in China, Asia, or will we continue to see them work around them? Look, this is a gradual thing that's happening in all developing countries around the world. We understand that there's suspicious business practices everywhere at different stages, and then things are improving. The level of corruption in various developing nations is much less today compared to 20 or 30 years ago, and we're even Hong Kong for that matter. So what does that mean for supply chain, and what does that mean for the shifting of production? Well, from year to year, it doesn't mean much, but here's what you need to know in thinking about strategically locating businesses as a result of this risk. Number one, the risk is always there. Number two, because the risk is always there, then if you're from a country where there's a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act like Germany, USA and several other developed nations, then it is incumbent on you, the board of directors of a company that has a supply chain in various countries where there's this risk, to make sure that you are protecting against that risk, that you are not exposing your company to foreign corrupt practices. An example was a German company I talked to many years ago. They had a joint venture in Guangzhou, and their expansion of their factory happened in Shanghai. And I asked them, why are you going to Shanghai? The labor costs are so much more expensive than Guangzhou. And they said, oh, a dictum from Germany came down to say it's much more formalized and black and white in Shanghai compared to Guangzhou, and that was a foreign head office decision that was made because of this risk. So it's not just a country, even within countries there are different levels depending on which province or different sectors that you locate in. Number three, we need to think about power. If you're a large multinational, not only you have Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that you need to attend to back in your home country, you have lawyers that can attend to various risks associated with, say, the protection of IP, and you can put lawyers to work to make sure that you actually fight any of these cases, and you have the power to do that. But for most SMEs, they don't have the lawyers or the power to do that. And so that's my final point here, and that's where we do advise that you go into black box manufacturing, where you have secret manufacturing of final assembly or secret packaging for final shipment to your destination country, so suppliers don't know where you are sending the product that they have been in production with you on. And virtual teams is a similar way. Before COVID, you would actually be physically in the factory, identify them, making sure that things are done above board and properly. Okay, so there are various strategies. The idea won't go away, but the big thing you need to take away is yes, multinationals are aware of that, boards of directors are aware of that because of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but when it comes to IP protection, there are different strategies depending on whether you're an MMC or an SME. Okay, next question was about China 2025, and there's several questions here. That is, will China's plan have a positive or negative impact on global supply chain? Will the Made in China 2025 plan be affected due to post-COVID-19? Are there countries attacking China? And regarding the China 2025 plan, some state that critics say that China is distorting global markets by prioritizing political considerations over economic incentives. Do you agree with this? Look, this is the new reality, and China's not the first country in the world to use politics to help its own business. The USA has done that in the past, so has various European countries, Australia. Every country developed country has done this to a certain extent. China 2025, you need to be aware, what you need to be aware of is that China will have the largest consumer market by 2025, actually as early as 2023. And all Western democracies will prefer growth over other priorities in the long term. In the short term, different political priorities get in the road. You have the China-US trade war going on, but in several years' time, there'll be something else happening. There's always something going on at the political state level. But without China, the cost of goods in the West would on average be 20 or 30% higher. Could you live in the West without buying anything made in China? Very few people could do so today. All governments do involve themselves in markets to some extent, solving market failure, but also subsidizing various industries. Take, for example, US bailout banks in 2009, 2010. They bailed out the airlines back then. They bailed out the motor vehicle manufacturers. And these are all supposed to be, should be left to private competition. So, you know, it's okay to blame China for doing this and that and supporting different industries, especially under the China 2025 plan. But Germany has done the same, and US has done the same to some extent in various industries in the past. Okay, next question. The question is the opportunity 2 and 4 noted in the China 2025 plan. What is the exact difference? Well, number 2 is about enabling business processes through digitalization. So digitalization is a way in which you can make improvements in the business. Whereas number 4 talks about the outcome of the business improvement. That is, using lean techniques or higher and trying to reduce energy efficiency. When we talk about lean techniques, it's about reducing inventory at every stage of the supply chain. When we talk about higher energy efficiency, it is about making sure that we use more efficient use of water, more efficient use of power, and more, electricity and so forth. So digitalization is one way that this can occur, but for the most part, digitalization is going to affect 2 important areas. Number 1, it's in the information and the information transfer of information between different parts of the supply chain. So when we have faster transfer of information at different points, then we can interrupt different points and make improvements. Number 2, digitalization helps in the training of different parts of the supply chain, because digitalization helps to give feedback faster, and then you can use training to actually make people more aware at different stages of the supply chain so they can do better. And then ultimately that can improve the energy efficiency. Also, that can improve lean techniques. So digitalization can help number 4, but digitalization can help in other ways, especially with getting faster access to information, so you don't have to at the end do as much QC inspections, because you've actually got more information of the quality gates during the production process. Okay, next question, automation and the loss of jobs. A big question. As automation in factories is becoming the norm in the future, with a large population of low-skilled workers like China, Indonesia, India, how will they cope? How will they cope with the impact of massive loss of jobs of these workers? Where would these low-skilled workers be relocated to? Well, the low-skilled workers are actually getting older and older and older. Okay, the population of low-wage workers is actually declining fast. United Nations predicted by 2025 that there'll be a reduction in China of 40 million factory workers between the age of 15 and 30. Okay, so there's a huge reduction. They're actually moving into a new age level, and you're thinking, okay, will they have a job yet? Yeah, some of them will be working in a factory, but some of them can move into service jobs. But the big point is that change is gradual. 20 years in China has seen change, but it has been gradual. One thing that is changing in all the developing nations is that service sectors And the percentage of educated people in all of these developing countries is growing. Now the service sector in China is starting to become between 50 and 60% of the total GDP, whereas 10 years ago it was 40% of GDP. Thus, the service sector can accommodate more low-skilled and higher-skilled workers in such industries. Okay, here's an example, and this is coming from my mate at Silk Road Associates, Ben Simpfendorfer, and this is a graph that he put together. And the big point that we note in this graph is that yes, the ages are getting larger and larger over time. Okay, time, age, there's no difference there. Okay, so by 2040, then the average age in these various countries, like in India, is going to be 35, the average age in China is going to be 46, and so forth. But you must understand that if the average age is still below 40, that is still very competitive when it comes to manufacturing. So by 2040, maybe Vietnam will start to move out of that. But that is another 15 to 20 years away from today. Okay, so let's not burn our bridges before people get older then. This has more complications with respect to dealing with the aged population rather than the need for factory skilled workers. In fact, even people age 40, mid-40s can be paid very, very well in the factory as supervisor, as skilled workers anyway. So it's not like they're out of a job because they get into that age. Just one more thing on this. Okay, when it comes to the location of factories and this problem of aging population, it's got aging naturally all around the world. The population is aging. And they predict that it will top out at about 9 billion in years to come, and then the population will start to get smaller and smaller around the world. But in terms of locating factories, what's important is other considerations. For example, the infrastructure and ecosystem, okay, government policy in support of particular industry sectors like the China 2025 plan. Okay, there are other issues like the skill set of the labor force. So it's not just the low age of the labor force that is important. And also what's important in particular countries is the actual homogenization of the culture. So it's more homogenized in Bangladesh and India and less homogenized in Vietnam. There's a lot of factories in Vietnam where they have many different cultures working in factories and they don't always work well together as a term. The Vietnamese don't always work well with the Chinese and don't always work well with other Southeast Asian descents. As you can see, it's not all beer and Skittles to move from China to Vietnam just because the labour may be cheaper, just because the labour may be 10 years younger. Okay, there are many other considerations that you need to take into account strategically when it comes to locating your factory. Okay, someone asked about theory concepts. Would you care to explain, clarify more on theoretical concepts of supply chain management in general instead of examples? Well, so far we have examined and introduced to you the actual big picture. Okay, here is the environment in which we are locating factories in our global supply chain. For the most part, global supply chains begin their supply process in emerging economies. We cannot doubt that fact. That is a fact. It's an emerging economy like India, Bangladesh, India, Turkey, Africa, South America, Mexico. They start in emerging economies, and because of that we need to consider the macroeconomic effects, because in a lot of these emerging economies, government policy and industry bias have larger effects on how different industries, supply chains are shaped in those economies. So that's why we have considered first and foremost the macro factors before we go into the micro factors, thinking more about the theories in how to operationally manage the supply chain. Now from week 3 onwards, we start to look at more of the operational areas. Specifically, we start with the SME, because the SME is small and is likely to be focused on one or two countries at the most with respect to sourcing from suppliers in developing economies. And with that, we use the free circle control framework, which focuses on developing a relationship with the supplier, focusing on due diligence, documentation, and legalities of working with that supplier in that country, and finally, measurement and verification and auditing of the goods that you're ordering from the supplier. We're going to cover the next 3 or 4 weeks on these operational issues for the small SME. And for the most part, there is a lot of suppliers throughout Asia that are supplying to SMEs. It's not like multinationals are dominating all of these suppliers in developing countries. Later on in the semester, we look at the operational challenges faced by multinationals. And this is where we focus on the two frameworks at the bottom of this slide. The first one is we're basically looking at contracting theory, where we're looking at the sourcing decision, that hidden action problem, the hidden information, that is, we've got a problem of information asymmetry. Then the question is, well, what is the contractual arrangement to deal with this information asymmetry between the head office and the supplier that we're sourcing from, no matter what country they are in? Then, do we have multiple suppliers or do we have a single supplier? And then the next question is, if we have multiple sourcing, then how do we arrange that multiple sourcing? Do we keep the multiple sourcing in one country or do we spread it across many countries? Do we have it hierarchical? Do we have many tiers, or do we have a single tier and have much more control over all of the tiers in the supply chain? These are questions and a theoretical framework or approach that we can take for multinationals. One extension of this framework is the large buyer supply chain model on your right. That's where, okay, we have chosen multi-sourcing, and that's coming out because we have information asymmetry, because we have market forces. And it's very important that we do multi-sourcing because we want to control the disruption of any events, control against any disruption from any events like COVID, like earthquakes, like floods, like any other natural disasters that you cannot predict. So you're sourcing from Japan, maybe you also source electronic components from Thailand. So if something happens in Japan, you can still source from Thailand. All right, these are different ways of spreading your risk. And that's one way that multi-sourcing helps to diversify your risk. The other way that multi-sourcing helps is in terms of creating market forces. Okay, so that's a multi-sourcing strategy that multinationals, a lot of them, undertake. Now, coupled with that strategy is more operational, where we focus much more on how we complete the contracts. So to what extent can we have complete contracts with the suppliers in the different emerging economies? If they can be very complete when it comes to sourcing generic suppliers and less complete when we're sourcing from strategic suppliers. Because strategic suppliers may be making more customized components for your product. Where generic component suppliers, we are buying through a big market platform. It might be bought off the shelf and like a commodity. Finally, we need to think about supplier development and develop a long-term relationship with both generic component suppliers and strategic suppliers. And this supplier development is something that multinationals invest a lot of money in, likes of IKEA, Giorgio Armani, S. Oliver, Apple, Huawei, HTC, electronics, textiles, furniture, houseware. Multinationals are all investing in supply development of their suppliers in emerging economies. So we will look at these frameworks later in this semester, and that's basically where we're going from week 3 down to week 11 in this semester, taking a more operational view of the challenges of companies in supply chain management. Finally, we may think about a top 10 list, because here's a question that one student asked: will the new norm after the pandemic bring an impact to the supply chain management? Of course, there's going to be new reality when it comes to supply chain management. And as we've already discussed in our earlier week, there are various issues for the future of the supply chain post-COVID-19. Under supplier management, there's going to be much more consolidation. There's going to be much more need to have visibility of second and third tier suppliers. Under supplier location, SMEs may think twice about continuing with China because of more political uncertainty, and may depend after the November elections. That may change again. Just the uncertainty creates costs for any company sourcing from an emerging economy. Of course, there's a list of compliance issues that multinationals need to think about, and part of consolidation may help them to deal with their compliance risks. Also, there's a greater push to make the online internet platforms to take greater responsibility for the risk of products that they are selling. There's one thing here that I haven't mentioned. Maybe it's 11th item, but maybe it's an item that replaces one of these 10. And this 11th item is to spend more time to actually take more responsibility for the relationship with the supplier, because there's a lot of buyers out there that do not care for the long-term relationship with the suppliers when things go bad because of things like natural disasters or COVID-19. There's a lot of buyers that have actually stopped ordering from suppliers because they just wanted to save their bottom line in the short term, and they forget about the relationship in the long term. Because in 2021, 2022, buyers will want to come back to those suppliers, but some of those suppliers may not be around. And so this is something that a lot of buyers, SMEs, and multinationals have not had the foresight in their actions over the last 3 or 4 months. And it may come home to bite in 2021, 2022, when they ramp up demand again, and then they go and place orders, and they find that the supplier's relationship has actually gone backwards. Their supplier relationship has gone to a state where there's no relationship no more, because the buyer did not support the supplier when they needed support. This is 11th item, and I would ask you, which one of these 10 should we replace with this 11th item, because it's probably important. Okay, so let's go with our final question asked by many students, and probably a summary of what many students are asking. In today's class, we have discussed a lot about blockchain technology. I'm wondering if this will be an integral part of a company in the future in terms of privacy and security. Well, number one, let's just think about it. Blockchain is not going to replace everything in a company, but we need to think, in the end, blockchain is kind of like a database. It's not exactly like a database, but you need to think in terms of it's first and foremost an information management tool. Okay, so if that's the case, then we need to compare it with a database. And for the first and foremost, a database is the current norm. It's an established practice that all companies around the world in global supply chains have databases. Okay, the blockchain is likely to be used in places where it can enhance the failings of the database. For example, number one, you need immutable records, that is, records that cannot be rewritten, records that cannot be deleted. Number two, you need stronger security over the data entry. Okay, so that may depend on industry. So for example, in real estate and title records, then that whole industry could be revolutionized when it comes to the blockchain. However, in the supply chain, it's likely that the blockchain will be incorporated in different parts, but not everywhere at once. For example, as an extension of the information platform supporting supply chain logistics. And when we have different oracles like RFID, like barcode scanners, automatically inputting data into a blockchain under the authorization of that particular person in charge of that oracle, then we can see the blockchain bring in greater benefits to that aspect of the supply chain management. So there you have it, students. You've asked lots of questions. We covered the gamut, China 2025, macro issues. Then we got into micro issues, and someone asked about some theories. And we're going to get into theories more and more as we go, as the weeks move on, especially when we get into the operational issues. I look forward to see you in class, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye for now.